Did you know how complex Herbert's plan was?
I should have guessed. Devious old coot.
Please, everyone, just settle down for a minute. Now, there is one more question.
It's why did she do it? I mean, why'd you go along with it? What was in it for her?
Very good, Dr. Quartermaine. You want to talk about that?
I couldn't refuse him. I never could.
Meaning?
Herbert and I were lovers.
Oh, what? I've heard everything. Herbert didn't love anybody or anything except himself and his money.
Make fun if you want. None of you knew Herbert the way I knew him years ago. We were young. We were in love. It lasted a long time. Then other people became more important to him than I was. Other people took over my duties.
Is that why you went along with the plan to get him back?
Perhaps. I've asked myself that over and over again. Perhaps I was a fool. But when he suggested the idea, it felt like old times. It sounded like a lark, like one of the crazy things we used to do. I didn't see how it could hurt anyone. Besides, he paid me handsomely.
To die?
Yes. In more ways than one.
Yeah, boy, she must have been something to get him to part with his money.
Edward.
Well, now we know.
Not everything.
You heard the woman. Herbert was insane. That's why I'm suing. He had to be out of his mind to change his will and leave everything to her.
I beg to differ with you, Edward, but Herbert was far from insane. In fact, he'd hatched out a well-thought-out, steadfast plan. The idea of this was to establish that he was in danger just before he died, and thereby shifting the majority of the blame onto you.
What kind of fairy tales are you dreaming up?
I mean, I'm really dragging out some of the family skeletons here, aren't I? He was going to go to his grave, all right, but he wanted to take you there with him. Why?
I'll tell you why. I would like to tell you all why. Because Edward did something that's a worse crime than anything that my father ever did. He turned their own grandfather against my father so that when he was through, my father was practically disinherited. And this group got the entire bulk of the Quartermaine estate.
So actually, Edward, this whole thing is really your fault. You knew about our grudge and you didn't tell anybody.
Well, it's nothing I'm proud of. Anyway, it was a long time ago.
If you had told us, Edward, some of us might have been able to prevent this.
Herbert was his own man. Nothing anybody ever said to him made any difference. Ask her. She'll tell you the same thing.
Your turn, Dr. Wallace.
To do what? I have nothing to say to you.
Maybe you'd like Dottie to continue speaking for you.
It's her word against mine.
Why don't you let me guess? You played a pretty significant part in this whole plan. I mean, Herbert was much too visible. And after Dottie had been stashed in this secret room, well, someone had to make sure that she stayed there. I mean, after all, she had to be fed. So, under the guise of looking after Herbert's menu, you'd go into the kitchen and you'd gather up bits of food. I mean, let's face it, nobody was ever going to ask a question, right? There we had Dottie, all locked up in that hidden room, hoping that her old lover might join her. But he never did, of course, and so she waited. She waited to hear the signal. But it wasn't Herbert. It was you, Dr. Wallace. I will say that you made a very special effort. You got some of Dottie's favorite delicacies. I mean, after all, you had an investment here, didn't you? You knew she was being paid quite handsomely, and you'd figured out that it was just as cheaply for two to live as one, especially on the kind of money that she was being paid. Isn't that what happened?
That's exactly the way it was.
You shut up.
Lewis, get him out of here.
My pleasure. You're coming with me. Sam, you use the dining room when we've got them all. We'll take them downtown.
Yes, sir.
Buy what some women won't do for love.
And who would know that better than you?
I believe Ms. Clayton is next.
Now, look, why don't we take a break about now?
Right. Take a break, everybody.
When you examined the contents of the urn here containing the supposed remains of one Herbert Quartermaine, what did you find?
Do you want all the technical stuff?
Just the essence, love.
The ashes were those of a man much younger than Mr. Quartermaine.
What? Would you mind identifying which Mr. Quartermaine? It's confusing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Herbert Quartermaine.
Mm-hmm. The age of the remains?
Approximately 44 to 45 years old.
Well, so the same approximate age as the dear departed Mr. Pritchard. I think you can verify that, Mr. Lombardi, if you check out his license.
We already have. This case is pulling together very neatly, Mr. Scorpio. So far, we know the involvement of Dottie with Mr. Herbert Quartermaine.
Thank you.
We can guess at Dr. Wallace's. He was needed to pronounce Dottie dead. But surely there was someone else involved. Someone Herbert trusted more than any other person in this room.
That was Autumn.
No.
Now's the time to speak, Autumn.
Did you know what Herbert was planning?
Yes.
Why did you
I only
say
knew about it after it happened.
She's lying.
I'm telling the truth. I honestly believe someone was trying to kill him. That's why I brought Mr. Scorpio in on the case. Herbert only started to be afraid after Pritchard's death. Once he found out that I'd hired Robert, he was afraid Robert would find out. That's when he told me what he'd been doing. One day he pulled me aside and asked me to call Robert off the case. I told him I wouldn't. And then he told me why I had to. He was trying to settle an old score once and for all.
I admit I sent that threatening note to myself.
All because of... He admitted that he sent the threatening note to himself.
My life was in danger.
He said he wanted to plant a seed that his life was in danger.
You killed Pritchard.
That's also why he removed that warning from the stairway as well. He never intended to kill Pritchard. All he wanted to do was fake a near miss for himself.
Well, surely there must be...
And that was another way to convince people that someone was out to kill him.
No one will get hurt.
And it was the same thing with the fake food poisoning.
Breathing down our necks.
He arranged it.
Protection.
He knew all along that Dr. Wallace was going to save him.
Make Edward a better person.
Herbert never intended to hurt anyone. All he wanted to do, he said, was to teach Edward a lesson. That even with the past, to make him a better person. That's when I told him I'd do what he'd ask. I'd tell Robert we didn't need him. So I did. In all innocence.
By your own admission, you acted as his accomplice. That's not what I call innocent.
Listening to
Come on, now hear her out. Please. Come on, now hear her out. Please, and then make your decision.
On your say-so, okay, but I doubt I'll change my mind.
Go ahead. Now tell them how you tried to stop Herbert. Or maybe Alan could help us here.
Wait a minute. I'm nobody's accomplice.
Yes, but you see, after you and your father lost that stock contest with Herbert, You, prevailed upon Autumn here to perhaps try and convince Herbert to give you your money back.
Yes, but
At that point, she was so panic-stricken, all she wanted to do was to end this whole business so that nobody else got hurt.
I tried every way I knew to convince him it wasn't worth it. I begged him to stop, to let his relatives have their money.
Don't you understand? All I want is to hear Cousin Edward admit that I am the better businessman.
But what if he won't?
Well, then I'll fake my own death. The police will think that Alan and Edward did it in revenge for my taking their $50 million.
No, but that's insane.
No, it isn't. It's perfect. Oh, don't you see that? I can establish clues. I'll have Alan pick up a medicine bottle full of poison, and I'll hide it in Edward's drawer.
No, don't talk like that.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to upset you. All I want is to give Alan and Edward the scare of their lives. And when I've done that and made them look as foolish as Edward made me look years ago, then I'll rise from the dead
He
like
wouldn't
Dottie
listen
did.
to me.
Don't you see? Nobody's going to be hurt.
I never thought the plan would get that far. I was sure that Edward and Alan would admit he'd won.
Well, obviously you did not know how stubborn both of them are.
Here, here.
Yes, and Herbert Quartermaine, I must admit, more so. So you see, what you have here is that Autumn really wasn't his accomplice, but rather the voice of reason crying out. He wouldn't listen. Surely you can see that's clear.
I'm not so sure. Wait here. I need some time to review all the evidence.
Which way do you think it's going to go?
How much longer do we have to wait?
Well, Edward, I think your guess is as good as ours.
You're playing cops and robbers, and the stock market's playing havoc with what little cash I have left. Meanwhile, why aren't you indicting your pal here for collusion?
That's right. Sean was in cahoots with Herbert to rip us off.
Strictly business, Alan.
And I meant business when I said I was going to fight this will. That redhead was probably poisoning Herbert's mind against us. Otherwise, why aren't we Quartermaines mentioned in the will?
Well, I think I can offer up an answer to that. You see, Herbert used his passageways to spy on everybody.
And I'm sure you got quite an earful of how you feel toward him.
He couldn't hear us in here.
Of course he could. Herbert had a panel placed in the area directly over where you'd placed his remains.
Oh, no. Oh, yes.
I inhaled enough of your smoke, Herbert. Now it's your turn.
He's not inhaling anything anymore, Edward.
Oh, the trouble you caused us.
Yeah, you and your bloody contests.
Take the top off, son.
What?
Just do it.
Edward?
Ashes to ashes. Take that, you old buzzard.
I would say it's literally being dumped on.
I can see by your sour expressions you obviously did something that probably angered your cousin.
Ladies and gentlemen, the case against Dottie and Dr. Wallace will proceed. As for you, Miss Clayton, I won't make the mistake of arresting you and then having to release you for lack of evidence. There's no case. Right now, I have to have the rest of you come down to headquarters to make your formal statements.
I suppose Autumn could come down tomorrow. I think she's pretty shaken up at the moment.
If you're going to bring her down, sure.
Of course.
Let's go, people. Thank you in advance for your cooperation.
Hey, it's over.
I never thought it would end.